Hey everybody, welcome to Module 4. Excuse me. So I promised you at the very beginning of the course, I promised you it was going to be fairly hectic content-wise at the beginning, and then it was going to start to slow down at the end. We're still not through what I would call the basics. Module 4 is about AJAX, which I'll get to in a moment, but it is already kind of starting to slow down a little bit. So only 2 videos this week, so I'm expecting you to try more of the exercises. Then spend a little more time on the exercises than I have expected in the past. And we'll go over some of them in the live video. So to talk about what AJAX is, let me show you some examples. So here I'm at google.ca, and I'm going to open up the, actually no, let's do it this way. What I want to talk to you about is the suggestions that you get here. So what it's showing you is I've been watching this show Ink Master, and I've realized that some of the people on it are kind of odious people. So that's what those searches are. I've been searching for more information about that and trying to decide whether I should keep watching it or not. When you start to type here, so let's start to type, right? As soon as I hit A, I start to get a list of suggestions. And like this, some more suggestions, and so on. So what's going on there? Let me reload the page here. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to show you over here at F12. Now, if you think about it, there's no way that it could have preloaded all of those suggestions. There's no way that it could know in advance what I'm going to type, and all the billions of things that might be good suggestions can't be preloaded into Google. So it must be fetching those suggestions from somewhere. So what it's doing is, as I type, it's sending what I type somewhere and receiving suggestions. And you can see it happen over here. I hit F12 to get in here. So remember, you've got your elements view and your console view. If we go into the network view, what this shows you is all of the files that have been loaded. And we'll go into this a little bit more later on. But what you'll see is, as soon as I type A, immediately there's this query that goes off. So this is a request that was sent in the background, an HTTP request, and the response came back looking like this. And if you dig into it, you should be able to see, there you go, Anaconda Python. This is all of the suggestions that are now appearing here. So what happened here is this. There's a JavaScript program that is linked to keystrokes in the search bar. When I hit a key, it immediately takes the contents of the form and sends it via an HTTP request in the background. So without having to reload the page, it sends a background request to the server, and the server answers with some data. When the JavaScript program receives the data, it incorporates it into the page. That's AJAX in a nutshell. So AJAX stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. I'll let you read if you want to unpack what all of that stuff is. But it's using JavaScript to fire off requests to the server without having to reload the page. So it's everywhere in modern web design. You see it everywhere. Anytime you load a page and part of it loads, and there's a little wheel, and then the rest of it loads, it's AJAX, right? So if it's reloading just part of the page instead of all of the page, it's doing it through this technology called AJAX. So that's the name that was given to it. It was coined about 15 years ago, I think, this term AJAX, to describe that process as it was becoming more and more important. Another one I want to show you is Twitter. This one's a bit risky because you never know what you're going to see on Twitter, but I think my feed is fairly safe. I may have to edit it later if some nasty stuff shows up. Okay, so this all looks PG-13, so that's good. What I want to show you is, and you've probably noticed this before, as you scroll down in your Twitter feed, see what's happening with the scroll bar? As it notices, it doesn't let me get anywhere near the bottom. As it notices I'm getting near the bottom, it loads more stuff. So that's AJAX too. In this case, we're linking to a scroll event, and when it scrolls, it can use JavaScript to figure out how far we've scrolled down the page. And if it senses that I'm getting far enough down, then it will launch requests to load some more content. And again, you can see it happening over here in the network tab. When you first open the network tab, if you haven't had it open the whole time, you won't see all the previous requests. But now I'll start to see it'll be flooded with requests. So all kinds of stuff is coming in here. And yeah, there you go. You can sometimes make it to the bottom and see the little wheel. So that's what's really going on. So it's an infinite scroll feed, an infinite news feed, based on my position, and it's done by basing it on my position in the scroll bar here. So that's AJAX again in a nutshell. I'll have to review that what I just scrolled through later to make sure that there's nothing really offensive in there, but I don't think that there was. So that's AJAX. That's what AJAX is, and I want to go back to just briefly the original set of slides. So if you remember, you started in first semester with just the user interface. Then we added the server-side stuff, so PHP scripts and the database over here. Then we added some JavaScript, which allowed for user interaction and dynamic stuff over here. This is the final piece. We're adding this new path for HTTP requests. So after our page is loaded from our JavaScript program, we can send a special, what's called an AJAX request. And the server will behave the same way. It'll retrieve the file, it'll run scripts if necessary, it'll send the response. That response will be grabbed by JavaScript, and then instead of re-rendering the entire page, it can decide what to do with that response, whether it needs to make some changes to the page and what changes those should be. Okay, so this is a really fundamental technology. When I first started teaching this stuff 10 years ago, it was a bit less fundamental, but now it's just absolutely everywhere. Okay, so let's take a look at some code. Let's go back in here. So in the code for this week, you will find a bunch of stuff, but you'll find Hello AJAX and Hello AJAX 2. That's what I'm going to take a look at. I've already put them over here in htdocs under module 4 stuff, and I have XAMPP running. So I'm going to go to localhost week 4 stuff. Sorry, module 4 stuff. There we go. So here it is. I'm going to leave this window open because we're going to use it. So I'm going to go into Hello AJAX. So here's how this works. Now when I click this button, a message is going to appear here, which is really no big deal. Like you don't need AJAX to do that, but this is a demonstration of how to use AJAX to load a file, to retrieve a file, and then use it in your program. So when I press click to load text, it's going to load a file. Okay, so it's going to load hello.txt. So if we take a look at what's in this file, it's just got this text in it. It's just got a single line of text with actually an HTML tag in it. So it's going to say hello world, and it's going to put that into a P element, which is sitting right here. So I've got here's my body. I've got my button. Oh, it's a span element, sorry. And then I have a span element with an ID so that I can grab it in a JavaScript program. And it's empty right now, but I'm going to fill in the content by fetching that file. And we can watch it happen in the network tab over here. If I click this, click to load text, you can see it. So the text appears here, and you can see it sent a request for hello.txt. And these are the headers of the request. So it's just a straight request. Let me just see if I can this a bit smaller. There we go, so we can see a bit more. You can see the raw response over here. So this is the response that I got, and you can see a preview of the response here. So this is what the response, there's not much difference in this case between preview and response. Over here, if you look at the very first request that was sent for the index.php file, index.html file, this is the raw, and the preview actually shows you what the page looked like when it was loaded. And then there's the request that was sent after that for the CSS, then the JavaScript file, and then finally, much later, I press the button. If I press the button again, it'll give me another hello.txt. It'll load it again. Okay. Now, if I just to prove to you that it's coming from hello.txt, I could change this. I could say, let's change it to goodbye world. Now it's going to launch a request. Now this gets a little bit tricky. So this file is now changed. When I first press it, it'll probably still say hello world. The reason simply being that it's cached that file. and we're using a GET request here, so it's going to go to the browser is going to go to its file cache and get this and recognize it's the request for the same file and and retrieve the same file. That's happened somewhere along the chain. It might happen on the server. One way to get around it is to clear the cache. This won't happen in most of our examples, but it happens in this one because it's so simple. But the other way is I can do Control-Shift-N. Let me just copy this. Control-Shift-N to open an incognito browser, and then paste it here, click to load text, and you'll get the new message, goodbye world. Okay, so it really is loading it from a file. It just got stuck in a cache over here. If I click this now, will it say goodbye world? No. You could try Shift F5, but that usually doesn't do it. No, you have to really go into the settings and clear the cache, unfortunately, in this case. Okay, but hopefully I've convinced you that it's actually doing what I say it's going to do. The other thing I could do is I could change this to a post request, which is kind of optional here. We're trying to keep things really simple, but I'll show you how that works in a second. So if we go into the Module 4 guide here, it walks you through the first AJAX request here, and with a little footnote about when things don't work. And this is basically the syntax that I'm using. So let's go take a look at what's going on behind the scenes. So index.html, I guess I'll load that one up in VS Code. So this is my index file. It's just loading a style sheet, and it's loading hello ajax.js, and it gives me a very simple page with a button and a span to put the response into. Over here in JavaScript, there we go. So a couple things to point out here. First is that I'm following best practices by putting all my code inside the load event. And then here's the key piece of functionality. So I go get the button, which has an ID, so I can get it by ID. Notice I don't have a form here. It's just an input element with type equals button, which rather than type equals submit. That just creates a button that looks just like a submit button, but it's really to hang JavaScript off of. So I go get that button, and then I add a click listener to it, and this is the critical piece of syntax right here. Okay, so it's fetch. So there's a newish API built into HTML5 called the fetch API. And this is kind of the latest and greatest way of doing AJAX queries. There is another way too, which I mention in this little note here, an aside, fetch versus XML HTTP request. The old way of doing AJAX was using this XML HTTP request object, which is still built into the system. It's still built into the browser. Fetch is much cleaner and neater and nicer. The only downside of using fetch is there's no help for it yet on W3 Schools, and it's not supported and probably will never be supported in Internet Explorer. It is supported in Edge, and eventually Internet Explorer will probably die eventually, having never gotten support for fetch. But that's okay. So we're losing a little bit of cross-browser compatibility. There's a note here on how to get it back, how to enable fetch in Internet Explorer, but we're not going to worry about that. Just don't use Internet Explorer, but almost any other browser will be fine. Okay, so here's how it works. We say fetch, and then we give this is the address of what we want to fetch. Credentials include, we put here for technical reasons. We don't need it most of the time, but putting it there is going to help us. So in these curly brackets, we create an object which we can use to pass in extra parameters. So we're passing one that's going to make sure that if you have used your if you're in your private area, that it's going to resend the login info. Otherwise, things won't work very well. It resends cookies and stuff. So just include it, and it'll make your life easier. And don't worry about it. So we're going to change that to credentials include. Then notice this is a kind of chaining here. So we're calling from the fetch object, we're calling the then method. And this is, you can treat this, I'll explain this in a sec, and it's explained, there's a lot of optional stuff in the guide. There's like 3 optional sections at the end after the 3 that we're covering that fully explains what this is. But basically it goes off and it sends off the request, and then it sits here and it waits for the request to come back, but you can continue to use the page while it's waiting. That's the asynchronous part of AJAX. So it fires off the request in the background. The user can still keep using the page. And then when the request comes back, it's going to execute whatever is inside the then. And this is actually a specification of a function. It receives a response, and it's going to return response.text. And then that you can just leave it as boilerplate. The second then calls the success function. So you can put an anonymous function in here, but what I've done is I've defined the success function up here. The success function will receive the text, because we're just getting a text file here. It's going to receive that text as a parameter, as an argument. And then I just get the target. I set the inner HTML. Oh, and I guess I also put it in the console. So if we go over here and look in the console, we'll see the hello world appearing there. Okay, so if we mess with this a little bit, if we put a different file name here, and then I'm going to reload here with Shift F5 to make sure it reloads the JavaScript. If I hit click to load text, it gets me back this not found message. If you look over here in the network tab, you'll see this is red, and the response was 404. So we sent a request for hello2.text, and we didn't get anything back. So what comes back from the server is a 404 error. With actually, because of the way Apache is configured, it sends back a little web page to tell us that. And that, since we just take that text and dump it on the page, that's what we get here. Okay, so sometimes when you make a mistake like that, you'll see something on the page to indicate it. Sometimes you won't. But over here in the network tab, if your query is red, it means that it was not able to fetch the file. So that's one thing you can do. There's other stuff you can do. We're going to stick to GET requests in this course, because post requests via AJAX are a little bit more tricky to send parameters. But if you did want to change it quickly to a post request, you can do this, method post. So you include that as another little parameter after credentials include. It shouldn't change the functionality of the page, except that now it's going to use a post request, which in our example will mean that it won't use the cached version of the file. So I've got goodbye world now, and if I change it to hello.txt, let's add some exclamation marks here, save the file, press the button again, and you'll see the different file being loaded. So the first time we loaded this, the second time we loaded that, which is a little bit different. Okay, so so that's one quick way to fix that caching problem, but most of the time we won't need to do that. And the disadvantage of having done that means that when we start to pass parameters as part of our HTTP request, things are going to get a lot more complicated. So we're not going to generally do that. The only other thing I guess I'd like to tell you, so sending post requests is sending post requests is explained in an optional section at the end of the module. So this is stuff that used to be in the course, but we backed it off because it was too much. So if you want to know how to send post requests, they're in here. If you want to understand the fetch syntax more, it's here. There's a lot of stuff that you have to go through to kind of really explain the syntax. Oh yeah, and it includes the arrow function here. So I did want to just show you that. I put it in here because this is the way everybody does it. It's an alternative way of defining a function. So if you go x equals function, a return a times 2 like that, that creates a function. So if I go x5, it's going to say 10. Here's another way to do it. Y equals. Now we're going to define a function using the arrow syntax. So you put the parameter there, arrow. So it's kind of like a becomes a times 2. And that's equivalent to defining a function with one parameter a that returns a times 2. It's just a really convenient, nice way to do that functionality. So y now is also a function that multiplies things by 2. It's a really compact way of doing function syntax. It's becoming more and more popular. People call them arrow functions. They're also sometimes called lambda functions. And they've recently sort of surged in popularity, and they've been incorporated into Java and JavaScript and most languages out there. And a lot of people like to use them. You can also, you can create, let's do one more function. If you want to do multiple parameters like that, you can do this. Goes to a plus b plus c. So you tend to use it, so then we go z, 5, 6, 7, becomes 18. You tend to use that syntax when you know that you just want to return something and that the calculation is fairly simple. It's not a function with a huge block of code. So what that means is right in here, we could actually replace this with this syntax: function response, curly bracket, return response text, end curly bracket, like that. And that would have the exact same effect, but it doesn't look as nice. It looks a little bit less clean. So if I go to Shift F5, click to load text, it still works just fine. Okay. But we'll stick to the arrow syntax here. Okay, but all of that stuff is, like I said, you can treat all of this as boilerplate. You have a fetch statement. Always just include this. And this is explained in the curly brackets, or explained more in the optional section, so I invite you to go look at that. All you really need to know is you put the URL here. You have two .thens. The first one gets the response and pulls the text out of it, and then passes it to the second .then, which is where you define your success function, which receives the text that was pulled out here as a parameter. Okay, we're almost there. The other thing to look at in the, let me just go back up to the top here, in the Module 4 guide, we're in Section 1 here, is sending parameters. Okay, so since we're using get, the parameter sending is quite simple. We just put them in, we hard code them into the URL, like this. Okay, so you, just like you would type them into the URL in a browser, you put a question mark after the address, then you go, parameter name equals, ampersand, parameter name 2 equals, and so on. And they're just going to get sent off along with the request. And so what I've done here is I've created a URL string, a variable, which I can then console log to look at it and make sure it looks okay, since I'm assembling it out of pieces. And then I do a fetch putting the URL there, and the rest of it looks the same. Okay, so if we look at hello to AJAX, hello AJAX 2 here. Okay, if I put my name here, Sam, click to load text, what you'll notice over here, so it says hello Sam. Over here, see, there was a parameter sent. If I click here and go on the headers, this is the AJAX request that was sent, and it included name param, and the response came back hello Sam. So, and this, notice this was not for a text file, this was for a PHP file. So if I change this to hello Bob, click to load text, our caching problem is going away, because technically this is a different URL because it has different parameters in it. So it will not use the cached version of the file, which is why this works better. So now it says Bob, and so on. So if we take a look at the code for that, let's go into hello AJAX 2. It's let's open this with code, and then go into JavaScript and open this with code. Okay, so here's my index file. It's pretty much the same. We've got a button. The only thing I've really added, and it's got the same span here, but I've added a text field with an ID. Again, I'm not bothering to use a form here because I'm not submitting anything. Yeah, and that's helpful, because if this was inside a form element, if I hit enter in the text box, it would submit the form. So that's a whole thing. So by not using a form element, I've avoided that complication. Over here in the code, what's different here? This is pretty much the same, except instead of saying hello text here, I've put a variable. The variable is created over here, hello.php question mark name param equals plus name. And then I log it here so that I can look at it to make sure that if something goes wrong, I can look at the URL right here to see if it was okay. This is just debugging output. And everything else is the same, and even the success function is the same. I'm just taking the text, logging it, and putting it into the span. Okay, but at this time we're sending a parameter. What if I wanted to send two parameters? Well, I could add a second. Do I want to do this? Yeah, why not? Let's do ID name 2 here. How about your other name? I don't know. So maybe it's your first name and your last name. Okay, yeah, let's do that. First name, last name. Okay, so they're called name and name 2 over here. Let's just make sure that looks right. Yeah, first name, last name, click to load text. But it won't be doing anything with the last name. It still just says hello Sam. Over here now, I want name, and I want name 2, like that. Notice I'm getting the document and then I'm getting the element and then getting its value. And then I just need to add it over here. So question mark name param equals ampersand name2 param, we'll call it, which isn't, it's not the greatest naming, but it's okay. Name2, Alt Shift F. Okay, save that. Oh, when I did Alt Shift F, it did this on me. It just kind of made that into a little bit, broke that out a little bit. But other than that, it's the same. Now I send the URL and get the response. Let's take a look here. Sam, Scott, click to load. Still says hello Sam, because we're not quite there yet. But you'll notice if I click here, oh wait, I need to go Shift F5. Sorry, Shift F5 to make sure I'm reloading the JavaScript. Let's do that again. Click to load text. Click here. Now I'm sending two parameters, name param and name2 param. How come they don't show up here? Well, because I'm sending this to hello.php. We haven't even looked at that yet. Hello.php is ignoring that parameter. So let's do the final piece. I'll post this code later. Open it up here. I'm being sloppy here. I'm not checking. To keep things simple and focus in on what we're doing, I am just sanitizing, but I'm not checking for nulls and stuff like that, which you would normally have to do. So this is a very simple, I call this a server script. So imagine most of the time we'll be sending off to a PHP program to get maybe some more info from the database, but we're not doing that yet. We haven't filled that piece in yet. So it's just receiving the parameters. So we'll do hello name, name2, right? So first and last name. Okay. Let's go back here. That should be all I need to do. I think if I just click to load again, I don't even need to reload this because I didn't change the JavaScript, the front end code. I only changed the back end. Click to load. There it is. Hello, Sam Scott. So same request went, but the response came back Sam Scott because it read both of these fields. Okay. If I do that, it'll hello Sam S and so on. Okay, so that is basically it. Okay, I will post this this new version of Hello Ajax 2 for you to look at, but I just added a text box over here so that I could send a second parameter over in Ajax. I grabbed that value out of the form element like that, and I appended it onto this string. If something had gone wrong, like it's easy for things to go wrong when you're putting together a string like that, like maybe I forgot the ampersand, so what effect would that have? Okay, so I did Shift F5 there to reload it. Click to load text. Ooh, yikes. So what happened there? Well, if you take a look, because I'm console logging, what it sent was hello PHP name param equals, and because there's no ampersand, that all looks like the value of name param. And if you can see it too if you go over to network, you'll be able to see that it sent one parameter called name param with all of that in it. So it's a good idea to have that, to do it my way here. To use you can use this boilerplate. Assemble the URL when you're sending parameters, and then log it before you send it, so that if anything goes wrong, you can. There's a number of places you can look. You can look in the network tab to debug, or you can look over in the console. So if you see this over in the network tab, you're like, how the heck did that happen? Now you can look in the console and say, okay, something went wrong here. I can see there's something wrong here. Something went wrong when I assembled the URL string. So it should. I think I just fixed it. Shift F5, Sam Scott. Click to load text. By the way, when you're creating a PHP script for this purpose, you can test it just like you would test any other PHP script. So if I just go to hello.php over here, this is what it returns. And I can test it manually. Name param equals Sam. Hello Sam. Ampersand name2 param, I think I called it, equals Scott. Hello Sam Scott. So there's nothing different about this PHP file. It's a PHP file like any other. It's not returning a whole web page though. It's just returning a piece of text. But the browser still renders it and reads it and everything. So it's not designed to be used this way. But there's no reason why you can't use it this way. So you can test your back-end script, your PHP script that's doing something through the browser like this, get all the bugs worked out of it, make sure it's working okay, and then start sending AJAX requests to it. So that's another debugging tip. So use the network tab, use console.log a lot, and test your PHP, your backend PHP script manually like this to make sure it's working properly before you try to incorporate it into your page through an AJAX request. Okay, a lot more chance with AJAX requests for silent failures when things go wrong, just nothing happens. You got to have these debugging tools. You got to dig into the network tab, to the console tab, to the elements tab, use console.log all over the place, debug things in little chunks, and so on. Okay, so what do I want you to do? I want you to do a whole bunch of exercises. So let's go and take a look at those exercises here. Give it a sec. My external hard drive needs to start up. Okay, here we are. Module 4 exercises. Here's what I would like you to try. So change Hello Ajax 2 again to turn it into a simple translation program. Okay, so the idea here is the user enters a single English word or phrase and it gets translated. The PHP program should receive the parameter and then respond with either the correct word in the language if it knows it or question mark if it does not. Make sure it knows at least 3 words. So you can translate it into whatever language you want. I used French because I speak a little bit of French, as do the people in my family. So when you hit translate, if it's house, it says maison. I forget what other words I put in here, but if you put a word it doesn't know, it'll say that word equals question mark. Okay, so so once it's working, turn the page into a proper form and use the submit event to launch the query. Okay, so that's the next step. Put an actual form element around it and use the submit event with event.prevent default to prevent submission of the form and to launch the query. It says this will create a nice user experience. Yeah, because it'll just be a better user experience if you do it that way. So change this to a submit button. Okay. Now, when you do that, I'm hoping you can do that fairly quickly. What I want you to do next is try some of these other exercises. So the first one here is a password checking program. Okay. Now, in this case, you've seen this before. As you type, it tells you your password strength. I want you to do that through AJAX. So you have a password, an element of type password. Okay, so type equals password, not type equals text. Every time they type a key, so you can put it on the key up or on the input event, they launch a fetch request to the PHP program. PHP program checks the password. So you send the password to it. Make sure it's at least 6 characters long. Make sure it has uppercase letters, make sure it has lowercase letters, make sure it has digits, and make sure it has symbols. And then echo a code back. Okay, so maybe it's up to you what the code is. 0 could be bad password, 1 could be good password. If the response when it comes back shows a problem, then what I want you to do is color the input field red. Otherwise, if it's okay, color the input field green. So as soon as they begin to type, it should go red because it'll be less than 6 characters. And then eventually, if they get all the rules right, it should go green. And you can expand on that if you want. Like you can send back different codes. There could be a code for too short, a code for 1 is too short, 2 is no uppercase, 3 is no lowercase, 4 is no digits, and 5 is no symbols. And then you could translate those codes in the JavaScript to actually give them an error message. All right, and then finally, that's a really good one to do. I really hope you try that one. And then there's a third one here. I'll let you read it on your own, but I want you to try as many of them as you can. Yeah, I think this is a cut and paste error. It's a good idea to upload your stuff to make sure it works, because with AJAX, there's other errors that can come up. It says modify connect.php, but you don't need to do that because we're not using a database. So I think that's a cut and paste error from a previous set of exercises. I'll fix that. But yeah, so give that a try, and we'll debrief some of these exercises and walk through them in the class. But you'll get a lot more out of it if you've tried it yourself. All right, so I will see you in the live class and in the next video. There's another video for this week with some more exercises to try, and then I'll see you in the live class. Okay, hope you're enjoying it.